Thank you, Patricia and Stephanie. It's always great to be here at Malaprops and to see many friends tonight. Thank you so much for coming out and being here. And anyone interested in Writers for Democratic Action, writersfordemocraticaction.org online, check it out. Busy year up ahead. Anyway, tonight I'm here with the new story collection, Old Crimes, and I thought I would just give you a sampling from 3 different stories, and I'm determined not to make this microphone do what Patricia told me it would do. I'm just going to give you a sampling of these 3 stories and talk a little in between, and then would welcome questions. And I thought I would begin really by reading the epigraph of the collection, which comes from an Arthur Miller play, The Ride Down Mount Morgan. And the quote is, "Maybe all one can do is hope to end up with the right regrets." And I think that's what a lot of these characters have in common. They are dealing with various regrets. So I'll give you a little taste of the title story. This is the opening of Old Crimes. It was June 1999, and they were at a family inn in New Hampshire. It was not the romantic weekend spot Lynn had imagined when Cal invited her for a quick getaway between sessions of summer school. Being together and time away, he had said, that's what we need, right? Lynn nodded, even though she was not feeling the togetherness at the moment, just the away, out in the middle of the woods in an old farmhouse with a prefab wing of rooms like a rundown motel. The walls were covered in dark paneling, and there was a faded floral bedspread, shades too small for the windows, and a 40-watt bulb in the one lamp on the dresser. The food in the dining room was family style with very little choice. The room filled with trinkets and little wooden signs everywhere. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. Bless this mess. And in the bathroom, we aim to please, you aim to please. There were tattered pinwheels and Pepsi bottles on the tables, a Cupid doll by the cash register, and things she had not seen in years, like pastel-colored rocks growing in a fishbowl, a dried-up sea monkey container, and a Cabbage Patch doll dressed up like a sailor. There were more toothpick holders than she had ever seen gathered in one place, and something about it all, the early American decor, eagle decals everywhere, and empty bird feeders, all the stuff, left her feeling like life had slowed, clicking like a dying engine, and then stopped. Needless to say, they were not partying and celebrating the end of the century as Prince had promised they would be doing back in the 80s when they were kids growing up hundreds of miles apart. Him in a cushioned, suburban, well-educated life in the Northeast, where things like the right schools were always at the forefront, and her maneuvering the backside of the Bible Belt with all the baggage and guilt often inherent in that. No expectations of anything beyond high school graduation until the guidance counselor, barely out of college herself, insisted that Lynn try. You have choices, the young woman kept saying. You can go anywhere. Lynn had met Cal out in front of her dorm the day she moved in. That was over a year ago, and he would be graduating soon. Although on break, both had brought a stack of books along for the weekend. He was studying to take the LSAT, and she still wasn't sure what she wanted to do in life, but knew he would be more impressed if she also had a stack of books. She was barely 20 and thought it was mean that her college advisor was saying she had to declare a major, something that he also said would affect the rest of her life. The high school guidance counselor had made it all sound so simple, and it was anything but. Still, she had taken a lot of courses she found interesting, even when her grades didn't reflect it. She had taken one in forensic archaeology and another in ethics, and the two together had left her thinking of all the many mysteries that remain unsolved and perhaps always will, not to even mention all that remains unknown and buried under ice and volcanic rock in peat bogs and the greatest depths of the ocean. On a whim, she had taken a creative writing class, even though her advisor kept saying that her chosen courses were not leading toward anything, and that if she didn't buckle down, she would not be able to graduate in 4 years, and her financial aid would likely not be extended. His voice sometimes sounded like a lawnmower in her head, muffling anything from past or present that sounded like a reprimand or a judgment. She had had enough reprimands and judgments to last a lifetime. Besides, she was the first in her family to even go to college, so whatever happened, she had at least done something. She had made that choice. That was what she told herself at the end of each day. She made a B in the class, some good ideas, but nothing thought through, the professor said. But she had continued to think about one of the exercises that was assigned at the end of the term. Pick an object. Pick a place where that object exists. Imagine a person in that place with the object. Then they were supposed to imagine a different person in that place with the object, and then another and another. How many variations, different characters, different situations, different stories might evolve. It was amazing how something so simple could quickly become complicated. She chose a belt because in her archaeology class, she had already been assigned to track something through the ages that people take for granted. At first, she had wanted to do hats because she loved hats of all kinds, even though too self-conscious to wear them, and was inspired by that one famous bog body on the cover of one of her assigned books, The Tolland Man, ancient and frozen and wearing a little pointed cap, a detail so simple and personal that it filled her with sadness. But when she began researching it all in the library, the history of the hat quickly became a lot more complicated, way more work than she wanted to do, though she never would have told Cal that. But the Tolland Man was also wearing a belt, and it seemed clear that was the easier pursuit, not to mention it offered far more action than the hats would have, the word alone suggesting action. A belt could be a song or a drink or a slap. The belt, looping and connecting since 3300 BCE, leather, suede, satin, and silk, rope, brass, cord, notched, cinched, buckled. It was a fashion statement, a utilitarian transport for tools and treasures, an object grown-ups could use to threaten children. It was a murder weapon, binding hands and feet or wrapped around the throat, a belt, a room. Inside a room, behind a door, a man takes off his belt. That was her sentence. Who is the man? What is the situation? Is anyone else in the room? I'll stop there. Thank you. That story continues with the repetition of that exercise when a little girl who's basically in foster care in this particular place shows up at the door, wanting to come in and touch everything in her suitcase, and that relationship goes from there. But the belts continue through all the stories. You see a lot of different kinds of belts, references to the Bible Belt and geography there, references to old crimes or suggested crimes. Some of the characters are confessing to things, some of the characters denying, and many of them just sort of left off to the side of where life has continued to move forward. And then the next voice I thought I would give you a sample of is a guy where that's very much the case. He works on telephone lines. He's a lineman for the county, and is very much caught in between these two worlds of technology. His wife, who his wife has gone back to school and sort of left him behind in many ways. I'm just trying to figure out where to begin, and what you need to know. So when you get to the part I'm about to read, he basically is a man on his own, getting as much time with his young daughter Amanda as he is allowed, and just trying to find his way. He has a mother, an elderly mother, that he takes care of as well. Did I say how there used to be silence? And now I'm wondering what people are going to do when the big blow comes, when all the lines are knocked out and the generators fail and we're turned back to a day guided by nothing but the sun and the moon. Do you know how to read a clock face? Have you memorized addresses and phone numbers? Do you know how to read a map? I ask Amanda, who sometimes listens, but most times doesn't. I say how it used to be a person actually had to get up and walk to one place in the house to answer the phone, that it was tethered there to the wall with cords and a plug that slid neatly into a jack that people like me came and installed. You had to get up off your ass to change the channel too. Sometimes you had to put tinfoil on rabbit ears and twist your body this way and that to pick up one of the 3 channels available in our area. The phone was a separate entity itself, a station, a fixture, not an appendage to interrupt you 10 million times a day. My old mama had a chair built into a little table that was just for the telephone. You had a dictionary on the shelf to look up something you didn't know. People had things like World Book. My old mama didn't have anything but Funk and Wagnalls, and I was jealous of the World Book crowd. First thing I did as a married man with a baby coming was to go out and buy a set. And Pam, who had just started taking classes at the university, looked at me like I was a fool. Of course you got a good buy, she yelled. Amanda, who we just called the baby at the time, filling her abdomen. It's like buying dinosaur food. Where have you been, Ricky? That was when she still called me Ricky, which I'd been called my whole life. It was right before she got it in her head that I might fit in better if we called me Rick, or even Rich or Richard. But my name isn't Richard, I told her. It's Ricky. On my birth certificate, it says Ricky. And don't ask me why my mama chose to just go with Ricky. For all I know, it was because of Ricky damn Ricardo. But that's just the way it is. Maybe somewhere out there is a guy named Ricky who fathered me, but that's something I'll probably never hear about. Where have you been, Rick? She said I had taken a wrong turn and missed the information highway altogether. And that has been her line for me ever since, especially once she went from adjunct to professor and really found her place there with the digital crowd and their little Friday afternoon gatherings at an outdoor cafe where they say things nobody else on the planet can possibly understand. It's the buzz and the wires and the wind up in the trees. And yes, I am left behind in an expansive desert without even the poles and lines to mark the miles. And yes, that is lonely. You have missed the information highway altogether, Rick. Not altogether, I told her. About the same time everything blew up. I know things. In fact, I had begun following her by then, and I did know things. Now I tell Amanda that she needs to learn how to wait and be patient. Be still and know. Somebody famous said that. And if I still had my world books, I might be able to say who. Be still and know. Or maybe it's from the Bible. Pretty sure it's either Walt Whitman, Confucius, or God. I don't Google, so you'll just have to take my word for it. There was a time we had a turntable with speakers the size of small coffins. We had one phone in the kitchen and an extension in the bedroom, and only had to dial 5 digits. I grew up with 5 digits, and we didn't go to 7 until I was in high school. The rotary made a nice sound and allowed time to concentrate between numbers, like the sound at the end of an album before the needle is lifted. There was a time when we had silence. It was so quiet, you could hear what someone said. You know what we'll all look like one day, right? I asked Amanda when we were parked at Sonic, waiting for our food. It was clear that she was hoping no friends saw her, the visor pushed to the passenger window, dark blue streaked hair hanging forward like a curtain. The days of her begging me to take her to Plaster Fun Time or Chuck E. Cheese were way back in the rear view. Eventually, I said, waiting for her to look at me, her eyes the same shade of blue as my mother's. We'll just have one long finger to push buttons, and our arms and legs will start to disappear because we don't use them. And the brain will dry up until it's about the size of a chicken brain, with the attention span of 1 minute, little one track, little tweak. She rolled her eyes at me, phone there on her leg where she had doodled all over her blue jeans in ink, a star, a flower, somebody's initials. Her phone lit up and made sounds every few minutes until she finally sighed and said, excuse her for 1 sec, while she let her friends know why she wasn't answering. I didn't want to imagine what she was writing back to them. So I just continued my own thought of what the future might hold. Single lane highways with no place for detours or a U-turn, no place to safely break down, no way to prepare for the big blackout. Pam communicates. She spends hours on Facebook flipping screen after screen of who's doing what to read this and that. I see her leaning in the doorway and grinning up at the phone in her hand to take a picture and change her profile. This is something she changes as often as her underwear. So-and-so has menstrual cramps and a migraine, and 53 people like it. So-and-so wants you to know she's the best, a winner, a loser, pariah, a boozer. She likes all of that too. Hours of liking. I'll stop there. Bit of my lineman. There continues to be through the stories a repetition of silence and the many ways we punctuate our lives with those pauses that mark one phase from the next. And the final story I want to give you a taste of is called Act 3. My book is filled with teachers and librarians because I think they cannot get enough shout outs, especially our public school teachers and our librarians, actively changing lives every day, actively changing lives. And this is a woman who has spent about 40 years doing that, teaching high school drama. And in this story, what you need to know, and it's suggested early, she has suspicions that she may have a diagnosis coming, and it's not guaranteed, but it has certainly left her thinking about the future of things. So they've pulled all their 3 children back together for the sort of family vacation to mirror one they had taken years before. So it's called Act 3. And I'll keep an eye on my clock because we open for questions at 15. Okay, great. It's been years since they were all together for more than a holiday gathering, and over 20 years since they were in this place, mountain lake, paddle boats, hikes with bag lunches. When Vera made the reservation, she told Glenn that she had only one reason in mind, a gathering of their children, because it all goes too fast, she said. And now they're all there, arriving from their various adult lives and sliding right back into their childhood roles. William, the oldest, with his new wife, Mara, and her son, Eli. Suzanne, the one they had always thought would divorce, and her husband, Pete, with their toddler twins, Dakota and Jackie, who are only silent when deep in sleep. And last but never least, Rosie, the baby, and Derek, who she's madly in love with, perhaps the last in a long string of prospects that Glenn said made him feel like he needed to hide his wallet. Rosie has a son, Tad, who's 7, and ready to record and repeat anything said. Glenn called him Teletad, and though they both felt guilty, they had done nothing to stop him the day he talked about visiting his daddy, Rosie's ex, who had become a preacher and wore a bathrobe like Jesus. Wow, Vera said. What does all that mean exactly, honey? And Tad shrugged and went back to unscrewing every Oreo in the bag. After years of teaching high school drama, nothing has yet to compare to the family encounters that have come and gone over the years. The children rotating under the spotlight with great regularity, weddings, births, jobs, William's divorce and remarry, a breakdown of sorts, Rosie after the soon-to-be preacher skipped town, Suzanne and Pete taking turns with their many different degree pursuits. When Vera thinks of the first time they were here as a young family, it seems so simple. The hotel is up in the mountains, a large turn-of-the-century wooden structure with a wraparound porch facing the lake. It was a croquet on the lawn kind of place, and it would not surprise her to turn and see men in striped coats and suspenders there in the gazebo singing something like Bicycle Built for Two, a song that always made Vera laugh with the memory of her mother at the end of life in nursing care, complaining that's the only song they sang other than depressing hymns that left everyone weeping. She said when she closed her eyes at night after one of those sing-alongs, all she could see was Jesus on a bicycle. Vera's mother had lived way past her expiration date, her phrase, like life was nothing more than a quart of milk. One day you'll know what I mean, she had said, the words garbled behind parched lips. And isn't that the all-occasion parental phrase? One day you'll know what I mean, one that springs to Vera's mind often these days. Vera had often instructed students in the importance of what haunts a scene, and now feels she has taken on the role herself. She's almost confided to Glenn several times, but it has yet to be the right time. Why add to the burden of a difficult day? He comes home from work tired and frustrated. Are we ever where we intended to be? And likewise, why ruin a good day? The one where he feels accomplished, healthy, and seems more like himself. So many roles and so little time. Is there ever a right time? It's like The Shining, Glenn had said when they first came years ago. Boats and hikers, croquet and bikers, and here's Johnny. He was working hard in those days, part of the HR team at the community college, and he really didn't like his job and the constant barrage of complaints. William was only 10 then, a skinny misfit, suspended between smart aleck cracks and still playing with toys like Buzz Lightyear and a stuffed cookie monster that he hid when friends came over. Now he's all grown into manhood and a successful medical practice where he spends all day examining eyes. His wife, Mara, is a petite wisp of a thing who looks like she might belong in the ladies' auxiliary, but then opens her mouth, flat country twang, and cusses like a sailor. Uh-oh, Patricia, I may have, it's like we're on the damned effing Titanic, she says. And I spelled effing. E-F-F-I-N-G. She says, with Tad standing there with his mouth open and soaking it all up. That staircase, she says, and all those chaise lounges, the ferns and chandeliers. She continues, pointing out things, the rolling hallways with floral carpets, big planters and wicker, a wicker wheelchair, steamer chairs. The heavy dark furniture is upholstered in maroon and gold and dark green, and the warped floors look like a tricky putt-putt course. The walls so thin that the night sounds range from coughs and flushes to baby cries and the occasional wail of sex, which brings all but the frantic baby and crickets to a standstill. By the first night, they are all fully restored to their earliest roles. William, well-read and up on the world, but also bossy, protective, and suspicious. Suzanne, the peacekeeper who sees herself as a free spirit, but handles the role in a way that dares others to judge and reject her, like when she was insistent that the twins not get a bath of any kind for over a week. Glenn said he had gone his whole life without hearing the word vernix, or God forbid, birthing custard, and now he was hearing these daily. And yet the paradox, because in no time these all-natural home birth girls were decked out in pink bows and ruffles. And finally there's Rosie, cute and funny, but with a streak of brat. And in recent years, Glenn's appraisal, yet again, has never met a conspiracy theory she didn't embrace. Drama, from the Greek drow, to do, to act. Vera once heard someone say, it's not about what you don't do, but what you do do, a line that always was successful in making the family laugh. Drama. It began as a floater, the beginnings of a migraine like she had not had in years, not since she was a young woman with hormones thrown by childbirth, and those exhausted moments when a safe harbor, a trusted hand to take care of her babies, allowed her to take a break. And as if on cue, as soon as she let go, the blood rushed through her head in a torrent, a haloed light eclipsing her right eye, followed by a much needed sink into darkness. It's just a migraine, she thought, a long overdue break. In all the years of the periodic migraines, what was consistent, other than having proclaimed a day of rest, was that she always thought of the same childhood memory as she sprawled in a puddle of late afternoon light in the center of that green braided rug. She could hear her mother in the kitchen washing dishes, and the sun felt so good on her body, the light in the big picture window flickering with the branches of the large dogwood tree. Stop there. Thank you. And that story just continues to weave the memories of the family, this long ago memory of her own childhood, with a lot of the plays and kids she's taught through the years. So those were my little prepared readings. There are, you know, there's this, I'm checking my time here. I'm not texting, I'm doing my Facebook. You know, there's a really short story about a young couple who actually find a confessional booth in an antique store and think it will be fun. And it really kind of goes downhill when they begin their confessionals. And I'm trying to think. There's a woman who is losing her hearing and is at the end of a long marriage to a man who has been very difficult in their marriage and her life, though he has the appearance of this great guy in town. And she goes to get her ears checked, and she's told that what she's missing are the low registers, the low tones. That's the title of the story. So she's not hearing male voices, and she suggests that perhaps this is evolution. And that is another story where there is a suggested crime, some solved, some not. The kinds of things we see, I think, walking around in life, that unanswered questions that we're left to ponder. So should I stop and see if there are questions? Or
that'd be great.
And if not, I can pick something else to read.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I could listen to you read for the rest of the evening, Jill. It's lovely to hear these stories and to hear them in your voice. That's a pleasure. So if you'd like to read another one, or we can take some questions and then do another one, it's really your show.
Why don't we see if there are questions, and then maybe I'll read the beginning of that one, Low Tones. Okay. So, yes.
Could you help us understand how you individually approach, say, a story like The Lineman, for example? I can appreciate how you might have seen the image of somebody, and perhaps the fellow and his kid at the Sonic drive-in or something. Not that you want to admit to eating there. But how do you go ahead from that, in your case, and populate that with this almost cascade stream of consciousness, like things that are going through these people's heads?
Yeah, you know, that is a story that really began with the opening line of the song, and that is how it begins. I'm rooting around here for glasses to see some distance. Here we go. And so I began with that. I am a lineman for the county, and I love that song. I love that phrase. And I need you more than want you, and I want you for all time. You know, and so that song repeats, and I had heard Jimmy Webb, that's right, the songwriter, on NPR one day talking about writing the song and you know, being way out. Now I forget where he was, but this lone stretch, you know, and this lone man up at the top of a telephone pole. And that said it was the picture of loneliness. And so I was thinking of that picture of loneliness, and this whole notion of that humming in the wires. I mean, I'm still absolutely mystified by telephone lines and electrical cords. So I don't even have to go beyond, you know, what's happening now. I was amazed by that. But then I was thinking of someone whose whole life is about a kind of labor, a service that then is outdated and done away with. And so in my mind, in his moment of anger, you know, he's thinking, so who you going to call when the blackout comes, you know? And I think that a lot myself sometimes. You know, we're so dependent on things that are on a cloud or invisible. I mean, I still like to have a physical calendar and address book, for instance. And so he began there. And then sometimes when a character starts talking, they just find their own way. And before I knew it, I had given him this elderly mother who he's trying to communicate with. And so really it is a story about communication and lost communication. And I don't know, you know, it's interesting as a writer, images sort of blow in sometimes, because when I was a kid, my grandmother had one of those freestanding kerosene heaters, you know, and she would like hang your clothes on the back of a little rocking chair there, and you'd run to the rocking chair. And on the front of that heater, you know, was that round porthole window where you could just stare in and see those blue flames. And I just loved that as a kid. I just loved to stand there and look in. And that image came to my mind, and I ended up, it became his memory And it's very much connected to his mother, who he's trying to see into where she is, because he basically is at a place in life where he has this daughter who he's hoping to hold on to, and this mother at the other end. So I'm not sure where else to tell you he came from, but I became very attached to him, more so than I thought I would.
Other question from the live audience?
Yes,
Hey, Jill.
Tammy, hi.
Yeah, hey. I was curious how you put your collection together. Did you start with one story? It was a springboard that promoted creation of other stories, or did you have several of this theme on the shelf, or how did this work?
Thank you. Oh, great question. A couple of the stories were older than the others. The last story, Sparrow, which is a pretty long story, had been published a couple of years ago. Well, actually more. COVID has me all mixed up. Probably 4 years ago. And The Lineman also is an older story. And then I was working on my most recent novel, and as often happens, while I'm working on a novel, I get ideas for stories, and I'm not quite sure, I can't stop over here, so I just jot the idea and put it off to the side. And as a result, when you put a lot of story ideas into the same pot, I think they start to thematically connect the same way pieces of a novel would. And so when I came back to all those story ideas and really started developing them, they did seem to have a lot in common. And there were a lot of echoes and repetitions. And when I wrote the story Old Crimes and found that prompt, or gave myself that prompt with the belt, it sort of lit things up, and I saw how several of the stories were already doing something similar. And so for me, working on this collection in particular, there was the attention that went to each story for it to stand independently, because it was important to me that they could do that. But then to go back through, and I really tried to treat it more like the way I might work on a novel, and thinking thematically. And some of the characters reappear in subtle ways. Sometimes you might know that it's this person you've met for sure, off on the edge. Other times it might just be someone similar, but what I really wanted to evoke was a sense of that kind of society where we all are familiar with these different people in different walks of life. So yeah, I did put I put a lot of time into to the point that I still say, oh, should that have been here? But I also like to break up point of view. So I don't want two voices that sound too similar close together. And they finally, I'm branching to a different channel here, but they finally, after years of trying out for the job of reading my own work and not getting it, I read 2 of the stories in the collection that's like Audible or whatever. So I was very pleased.
What was that experience like, reading your work?
It was really fun. I mean, I'm not an actor, and I realized every time I didn't get the job before, it was because they hired actors. So it was interesting because you have somebody stop you and have you repeat something, like the most memorable that was really moving to me in that story, Act 3. There's a later section towards the end of the story when she is remembering, how she would give anything, to have those pudgy thighs she complained about, sitting in one of those webbed yard chairs, leaving the indentations, and the kids playing freeze tag and bouncing a ball on the driveway they saved forever to pave that was covered in oil splotches the next week, and so I have in there's just a little italicized freeze. And I read it as I would, and the person, and this was so good, she stopped me and she said, no, that freeze means two different things. She's really trying, she's hearing the game in her memory. She's asking, let's let it freeze, let life freeze. And so it was just this wonderful direction that left me thinking about a lot of passages, when you read. I mean, it's easy to be in a hurry, and it really slowed me. Not that I need slowing. I mean, I sound like this, but.
Would you like to read another passage?
Sure. I will read just the beginning of, and I don't think I cuss in it. We'll see.
That's okay.
I'm kidding.
This will be the unexpurgated version. McCorkle tonight.
I always like to say my mother for years, if anybody mentioned my work, she would say, are you sure? And then, she would famously say, you're not going to find her work in the Christian bookstore. I lost a lot of readers thanks to that. Okay. So this is the opening of Low Tones. When the light is just right, late afternoon, clear, sharp angles, Loris Ward can look into the glass door of her shower and see a reflection of the little green house that backs up to her yard, as clear as if she's watching television. Everything has to line up just right to see it, and she has yet to figure it out. Does it come from the window or the mirror over the sink where Alton's razor is still sitting, though he will never shave himself again? Razor sharp, that's how she would describe the image, and closer than it really is, like in the car. That girl next door with her two-tone hair out there on the stoop making out with the boy who drives a truck with wheels so big they need a ladder to get in. This is no exaggeration. He keeps a stepladder in the back of his truck. The view is clear, but the time is limited. The sun shifts in the sky and the show is over. They don't know she's watching, that she has seen the girl's hand there on his crotch. The girl laughs with her mouth wide open like a hyena and then leans forward, her mouth meeting her hand, the boy holding on to that spindly cheap rail along the steps. She had to look out the window to be sure the shower door wasn't deceiving her in its wavy, dreamlike crystal ball way. But no, the image was real. The curtain falls and it all disappears. The girl has hair that looks like she ran out of money, half of a peroxide job, what Loris heard somebody call ombre. But at the time she thought ombre, and what in the hell did that even mean? She thought ombre meant a man, a gunslinging wild, wild west man, like what Alton might have wanted to be, or maybe that boy in the truck wants to be an ombre. Who the hell knows? Children. Everybody says someday they'll see everything and understand all that you do, but Loris doesn't believe that. How could they really know? How could her son even begin to know and understand? And if he ever does get it, she will probably be dead or demented, and what does it matter? There's so much of life she didn't know about. No one told her she'd lose her butt. Where did it go? There was a time she could sit anywhere and be comfortable, but now she needs to find seats that have some padding. Hair thins and disappears, and skin sags and also thins, bleeds, and bruises over nothing. Alton once said that when you get old, what's supposed to be hard gets soft, and what's supposed to be soft gets hard. calluses like a goat hoof, and toenails like sheep metal. And hearing has gotten hard. A problem in her middle ear, a dark and lonely looking place. They showed her the drawing on the wall when she went to get tested. They said that she was missing the low frequency, low pitched sounds, male voices, rumbling engines. They say vowels are harder to distinguish than consonants. She learned that when underwater we hear through our bones. The sound is faster, but it confuses the brain. And she was quick to say she certainly did not need any more of that. She said she guessed people are more bird than fish, that whoever has held their breath underwater and been relieved to get to the surface knows that. No one prepares you. No one says how the one person you depend on to talk to in a day might up and suddenly get a bad illness that leaves him making hand signals and getting even more frustrated with you than he was for over 40 years in the other life. The talk of him coming home has left her wondering how she will do it, if she can do it. Could she lather his cheeks and scrape that razor in all the right places, around the mouth, up the throat? Adam's apples have always made her uncomfortable. And why are they even called that? Adam's words got stuck in his craw, sin and evil that they said was all Eve's fault. And people wonder why children get confused at church. She looked up Adam's apple and it said the language meant man bump, and that it was yet another thing that got fertilized by hormones, a little cage locking in the voice box. And wouldn't it be something if they could retrieve those voice boxes from people, like that contraption they collect after a plane crash? Just imagine that. Her mama had called the Adam's apple a goozle, a word Loris hasn't heard in a long, long time. He got choked right there around the goozle. Right now, Alton's in the hospital where there are nurses in beds that go up and down and pleasant people helping him eat and pee and not get choked. She goes and stands there every day, not sure what to do. And it seems he looks at her like this is also all her fault. That girl next door has a mangy old tomcat who slinks over and pisses in Loris's flower beds, then sachets off with a kiss my ass. Her tree peony that came with the tag saying its name is High Noon, speaking of hombres, looks like you know what, and she's sure this is why. That old cat and the deer out there creeping around at night. The catalog said it was deer resistant, but nobody told the deer. And she has yet to see a big sunshine yellow bloom like in the picture. Instead, it's dry and withered and disappointing. I'll stop there. I have to stop there. Terry was howling. I'll be up here beeping.
Is there a last question from our audience? If not, it's okay. You'll have a chance to talk to Jill afterwards because Jill will sign books. Very graciously has agreed to do that. If no questions.
I did want to ask Jill.
You do have a question?
Yeah, and I'm really excited because I love short stories. So I just can't wait to get into the book. But I kind of thought I'd seen an interview years ago with Robert Altman, the filmmaker who did A Wedding, which is one of my favorite movies, and he talked about how much more difficult it was for a filmmaker to make a film that happens in a very short period of time. And I wondered if with the short story, you felt like that actually took more effort on an author's part than writing a novel.
It does for me. The story has always been the bigger challenge. It's like that saying that's been attributed to everybody from Mark Twain to Thoreau to I don't know who that about. If I had more time, I would have written a shorter letter. And I think, you know, for me, the novel is just sprawling and you don't have to be quite as careful and tuned. I like the way a story focuses on, you know, one particular space, but then as a writer, I like the challenge of trying to also push it as far as I can to provide the kind of history and background without going all the way into it, you know. So to just thread somebody's life in little bits of memory. But yeah, it is the bigger challenge.
Yeah, I would think it's more craft to do short stories.
Yeah.
It's more artistic.
And I'm not changing points of view. Occasionally I have a story that, you know, moves between characters. But I also think of the stories that I've written that are that way, or it's much more focused on the specific event that has brought them all together.
Right.
So there's a purpose there. The stories in this book are more that first, you know, focused on an individual, either first person or third.
Final thoughts, and then we'll go ahead.
Does
Just
Miss
a real
Miss
quick- just
Callie
a real
Warner
quick
has a question?
And we'll wrap it up.
I'm so happy you're here.
I'm so happy I'm here too. Thank you.
When you wrote these stories, did you share them? Do you have a writer person that you share your work with as you're going along, or do you pretty much keep it all in your own sphere until you're ready?
I sit on things for a very long time. But then when I am ready to let it go, I have readers I've had for years, and my first readers, good friend of Jamie's too. My friend Kathy, you know, my best friend since I was 15. And you know, she did the high school newspaper, so she's been reading my stuff for a long time. And so I often send the work to her, and it's also great because she tells me if I've accidentally lifted a name from my hometown. But you know, and then Lee Smith and Betsy Cox, and I've sort of, you know, gotten a feel for that. Their opinions, is something working? But I like to try to get that first draft as far as I can to what I'm hoping to do.
You would, final thoughts, Jill?
Just what a great pleasure it is to be here and to be in person. I mean, I've done a lot of Zooming, and there's just no substitute for real human beings in 3D and getting to talk to people. So thank you for coming out tonight. And thank you.
Jill. What a pleasure.